tonight we continue on with the picture of the fall of Babylon, Rome, and that was started in 17. And note as we go throughout this chapter, and we've talked about this, and you those of you who have been here, you understand why, but to kind of go back over it very quickly. So I'm going to refer to Babylon, Rome as Rome in the first century because they're referred to as Babylon, right? So when the book of Revelation talks about Babylon, it's really talking about Rome. And then, but then sometimes I'll reference stuff that is about actual Babylon back in Isaiah and Jeremiah and other books. And so when I refer to Babylon from the Old Testament, I'm going to refer to them as literal Babylon. And that way it'll kind of break up the confusion. If we could break up confusion during this, right? Please understand though, and again, when we talk about Babylon, Rome, what we're talking about again is we're talking about the world empire that those people were dealing with in the first century, right? So, but Babylon, Rome represents evil powers for all time, culminating very possibly in one major, persecuting world empire. But again, the book of Revelation uses Rome because that's who they're dealing with. It uses Nero because that's the type of persecutor that the book is talking about. And so again, it doesn't mean that we're not looking forward to a future Antichrist figure or a dominating world power. It simply means that that's the world power they were dealing with at the time, so it's framed in that way. Because again, the book was written to these people who lived in the first century. And if you remember back when we did chapter 2 and chapter 3, and it's got these letters to these 7 churches, well, the whole point there is, hey guys, listen, don't give in to the empire. And then the rest of the book is telling those people why they shouldn't give in to the empire. Right? And so here, in this chapter, we're going to discuss the financial collapse of Babylon, Rome, right? And so that was one of the major issues was people accommodated Rome because they were getting rich off of Rome. And so they could look past having to worship idols or being forced to worship the emperor or looking around at all of these injustices that happen because they're not hurting me. And so therefore, it's not so bad. It's not bad for me. And if I can just turn a blind eye to all the terrible things, I'm doing okay. And so therefore, maybe it's not so bad, right? And so that's a problem. And that's the problem that was going on here. And as we go through, we'll look at that. This chapter, again, focuses on the economic destruction. Again, it is a picture of judgment. The point being, you think that you're finding your financial security in the empire, but you can't because the empire will be judged and whatever financial security you found in the empire will be gone. And then what do you have left? Well, you didn't have faith in God, you had faith in the empire, so once the empire's gone, you're in trouble, right? Note that this chapter is written in the form of a lament, and laments are genres that are typical throughout the ancient world. The Old Testament has several laments. Isaiah has several laments concerning different empires. And of course, those empires are empires that had persecuted Israel. But they're spoken of as though we should cry for them and cry out for this empire or that empire. And the whole point being, those empires, you might as well cry for them because they are going to be destroyed. And it's the assuredness of the fact that God is going to judge all evil powers. And so you get several laments that look very similar, and we'll go through some of them, that look very similar to the language that we're going to discuss here. So in 18:1 through 8, you have the death of Babylon and the warning for believers to leave her, right? So those who may still come out of Babylon and turn their faith away from the empire and to God, get out now while the getting's good, because once judgment is finished, that's it. When Jesus returns and judgment happens, you don't get another chance, right? There's no more chance at that point. 9 through 19 you have the laments and the mournings from kings, merchants, and mariners. And so the reason that you have laments from kings, merchants, and mariners is because those are the people who were getting rich off of the empire, right? So the point is, these people are getting rich, but again, they're putting their faith in the empire. And if you're like them, then you need to get it together, because that's not okay. And then seeing this vivid image of the fall of Babylon/Rome, it tells you, this is what's going to eventually happen to all world powers, is ultimately the point, certainly to Rome. And so therefore, don't put your faith there. And then at 1820 through 24, whereas you have kind of a funeral scene for Babylon, Rome, in 20 through 24, you have the vindication of the saints, right? So all of the saints who chose not to put their faith in the empire, and they chose to stay faithful even unto death, well, at that point, those saints are vindicated. And so you get these two pictures. So you get the merchants and kings and mariners, and they're all sad because they've lost their cash cow, and so they have nothing left. But the saints who have died and stayed faithful to Christ, well, they have everything, right? And they're joyously celebrating. And so that's the point, is you want to be the ones joyously celebrating at the end, not the ones who are looking back at the financial destruction. All right, so starting in chapter 18. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast." Note that in the ancient world, and I always find this fascinating. So in the ancient world, whenever you'd go through and destroy a city or kill all of its inhabitants, they would just leave those cities. And that they would just be, and they have all these ancient texts that we'll go back and we'll find these ancient texts that are just there in these cities, and it's like nobody goes back and gets them or anything. Like it's not, I guess they pillage the things that they think are important, and apparently texts were not important to people, and pillagers at least. And so you'll go back and you'll find these texts, and I'm like, well, they just leave them. It's like they just leave all this stuff, and like, why wouldn't you just go ahead and live in the city? Because there it is, like you could live in these houses, but they didn't do that, and they would leave them. And just as a quick aside, if you go to Israel or Iraq or these different places, bless you twice. If you go to these different Middle Eastern countries and stuff, you can tell where there is an ancient city because they have these things called tells. And it's a steep that goes up and then it goes across, and you can see them in the distance. And what that tells you is that there was an ancient city there, and as the sand and stuff blew over it, it would eventually cover inside the walls and such, and then it would build up on the sides. And so that's what when you see the horizons in, like, say, Iraq, and you see those big hills and stuff, they say, oh, there's an ancient city under there. And so they'll go and they'll dig, and then they'll see what's there. And so, unfortunately, archaeology is such that they don't have enough people to go and dig all those up. So there are several places that they know there are cities, but there's nobody to dig in them. So when a city was destroyed, though, and there's nobody there and they just leave it, you would have animals and such that would take over, and they would just come in. Note, as far as the demons go, note that in earlier chapters, we find that again, the beast represents the emperor / the empire, and then the second beast represents the cult who's forcing you to worship the empire and the emperor. But then we find that who influences the empire? Well, Satan, the dragon, influences the empire, right? So you have demons and such that are seen as influencing the empire. Well, here, once the empire is gone, you see it as a haunt for demons and such. And so whereas they were under demonic influence, now it's a picture of demons walking around, wandering through its ruins. Similar language is used for the fall of literal Babylon. For instance, in Isaiah 13:21. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So there you have a description of literal Babylon. I find it fascinating that there are apparently ostriches there. I never think of ostriches as in that area, but okay. And it's apparently they really were special because Jeremiah also refers to the ostriches. Therefore, wild beasts shall dwell with hyenas in Babylon, and ostriches shall dwell in her. She shall never again have people, nor be inhabited for all generations. Again, that's talking about literal Babylon. And let me point out, do people eventually move back into literal Babylon? Yeah, right? People, move back there. But the point is the spirit of Babylon, right? The empire who destroyed or took over Israel and destroyed the temple and all of that, it was destroyed, right? So it doesn't literally mean, Jeremiah doesn't literally mean that nobody will ever go back to Babylon because, of course, Babylon was destroyed and taken over by the Greeks. And as a matter of fact, when Alexander the Great, when Persia, not by the Greeks, the Persians, when the Persians went to take Nineveh, the people opened the gates and let them in because they were so sick of their emperor or their king who had gone off and changed their gods and all these things that they said, well, anything is better than this, and so they just let them in. So they didn't even destroy the city, literally, right? But again, the point is that Babylon is no more. Literal Babylon is no more. 51:37, also, Jeremiah and Babylon shall become a heap of ruins, the haunt of jackals, a horror and a hissing without inhabitant. So again, the point being that once the empire is destroyed, it will be decimated. It's just big talk, if you will, about the destruction. And again, it's to give you a picture. It's to give you a bad picture of what's going to happen so that you don't associate with that. You don't want to be associated with a place that's going to be destroyed and there will be just animals and evil spirits. That's no good. At 18:3, for all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Right? So again, the kings, merchants, and mariners, and even though the mariners aren't specifically named here, they're named later, they've all accommodated Rome's human rights violations in order to profit financially. And again, I would use the example of all of those people who profited and even lived in Germany before and during World War II, right? And so here you are in Germany in World War II. Clearly, they're doing all kinds of atrocities, but you have all of these people that live there, first of all, who just say, you know what, there's nothing I can do, and if I just join in, I'm not going to persecute specific people. Like, gosh, I would never do that. But I'm just going to live my life and make my money. And as long as I don't mess with them, they're not going to mess with me. And what they do with other people, I can't be held responsible. Well, by you not doing anything, you are absolutely held responsible. In other words, you've got to do something, right? But then, even more specifically, there are people who actually knew what was going on, all of the terrible things that were going on, and then they actually made money off of Germany and were in cahoots, if you will, right? And so, one interesting example is IBM, right? IBM Computers. IBM Computers is an old company, and so in the 30s, they did computational machines and such, right? And there's a book called IBM and the Holocaust, The Strategic Alliance Between Nazi Germany and America's Most Powerful Corporation by Edwin Black. And that book talks about the fact that the head of IBM at the time went over there and he basically sold tabulation machines and machines that they could keep up with Jewish people and where they were. And it basically helped Germany in the final solution when they needed to kill all of the Jews. It helped them know where everybody was and to go in and be able to get them. And again, the head of IBM knew that was going on, and he sold the machinery and stuff knowing full well. He actually got a medal from Hitler, and he accepted that medal, right? And so why did he do those things? Did he do those things because he was anti-Semitic? Probably not. He did it because he was making money. And the way he looked at it was, well, they're going to do it anyway, probably, I assume. I haven't read the book, but I assume he felt like, you know what? They're going to do it anyway, and somebody's got to make money off of it, so it might as well be me. Well, that's exactly the type of thing that the book of Revelation is saying that is not okay. You cannot do that. And if you're a Christian, that is the wrong way to think. You have to do the right thing no matter what, right? Even if it kills you. If the empire ends up killing you, then so be it. Then you've won. And that's unfortunately for those people that died, that is the point, is, you have to keep your Christian morals and values and don't give in to the empire no matter what it is that they're trying to get you to do. If it goes against your Christian beliefs, you cannot do it, right? So then at 18:4, then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." So you don't want to be judged like the evil empire. So don't participate. Don't get involved with whatever evil is happening. Note that this separation is spiritual separation, right? So in other words, because what we're talking about is we're talking about ultimate spiritual death. Because if God judges you negatively, then obviously that's your soul, right, being judged negatively. And so you don't want that. You want to have everlasting life in the new heavens and the new earth, which we'll describe next chapter, as the holy city, the bride of the Lamb, all of that language. That's what you want to be. You want to be part of the bride of the Lamb. You don't want to be part of the harlot or here Babylon or Rome or however you want to describe it. Remember Laodicea, right, in chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 17 said, "For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." Well, why do the people of Laodicea not feel like they need anything from God? It's because they're comfortable. They're living off the empire. The empire is treating them well. And so what does any of that other stuff have to do with me, right? I'm good. So I don't need God. I don't need God's help, right? And so again, it's like that analogy that I used last week, where you have these things that will give you instant gratification, right? Like technology or whatever it may be, and you get instant gratification, and that will turn you from God, right? And so here they have instant gratification from their wealth and their well-being, because they're happy, right? And so just because you're happy doesn't mean that you're living your life right? I mean, we know. So, you can watch TV or movies or whatever, and you see people who clearly do not live their lives right, but they may be rich. Now, I don't know that they're happy. Oftentimes, they're not. But they seem happy, right? And so that doesn't mean that they're living the way that they're supposed to live. And when we talk about coming out, and we talk about Laodicea, it reminds me, an interesting point is Lot's wife, right? And so when they're told to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, Lot has all these different reasons he wants to go back. And he's like, no, I need to get, other people and whatever, and, my favorite jacket or whatever he wants, But then they're told, don't look back, right? And so what does Lot's wife do? She looks back. Well, have you ever thought about what that means? Like, do you think that God just turned her into a pillar of salt because she was disobedient, and God said, don't look at the city, and she looked at the city? Is that really, is that it? Dang, that's pretty harsh. I don't think that's it, and I think most scholars would agree. It shows her heart, right? They're leaving the city, and he says, don't look back, or the angels say, don't look back, and what does she do? She looks back. But what does that looking back tell you about her heart? It tells you that she longs for what she had back in the city. And I think that's the point. I think that's the reason that she's turned to a pillar of salt. It's not because she looked back and she just couldn't, she wanted to see the explosion and she looked and then bam, she's a, pillar of salt. I think it shows a heart condition, right? A spiritual condition where she wants what she had in that evil city. And I think that's the point. And that's what we have going on here is you have all of these people who are very comfortable in, the evil empire. And so they want to continue there, right? Because again, I want what I can get now, right? That's why credit cards were invented, right? So that you can get whatever you want right this minute because I can't wait. I need it right now, okay? And so that's the point here, and that's really the point of the book is you need to hold out, stay faithful to your Christian convictions so that you can have everlasting life in the new heavens and the new earth. That's what you want. Whatever little bit of happiness that you can get in this life through its pleasures and the pleasures of the world, those things don't compare, but it's kind of hard to tell somebody that, right? It's hard to tell somebody, but listen, I know you're going through something now, but it'll be better on the other way out. I always look at it as children who have to go through surgery, right? It's hard for children to go through something bad right now, but when you know that when they get out on the other side of the surgery and they go through the healing process, they're going to be better, right? But it's really hard to tell somebody who's going through that at the moment, stop whining. I know your leg is broken backwards and sideways, but, you're going to be better. I mean, nobody wants to hear that, right? You're in pain at that moment, and that's the way you feel. Well, that's the way this world is it's like, the world has all these things to offer, and you tell me that there's a new heavens and a new earth or heaven or whatever you have to say about the afterlife, but I see the pleasures that I can get here right now, and I may not see those things. And that's what the book of Revelation is trying to get you to understand through all of these vivid images of the destruction of the place that gives you the temporary pleasures here on earth, and how evil the empire is by showing it as a beast and dragons and all of that stuff and working with Satan. It's vivid images to keep you from making that decision. I would rather follow the empire because I can get stuff from the empire right now. 18:5, for her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. Notice that it is the cup of the wrath of God, right? Note the pride and arrogance of Babylon/Rome. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. Since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. Right? The language here is it's taken from Isaiah 47, 7 and 8 first. You said, I shall be a mistress forever, so that you did not lay these things to heart or remember their end. Now, therefore, hear this, you lover of pleasures who sit securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children. Right? So note the pride and arrogance, and the language is taken directly from Isaiah. There, it's talking about literal Babylon. And so here we have the same language used about Babylon/Rome. All right, so then it continues in Revelation, right? For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. And again, that language is continued from the same passage in Isaiah that we just did. These two things shall come to you. Sorry, my thing suddenly got caught. These two things shall come to you in a moment. In one day, the loss of children and widowhood shall come upon you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries and the great power of your enchantments. So again, the language that was used in Isaiah of literal Babylon is now reused talking about Babylon/Rome, right? So you get this whole idea. And again, why is Rome referred to as Babylon? Because again, Babylon had destroyed the temple in 586 BC, which was the be-all, end-all, worst thing that could ever happen. and then to the Jewish people, the temple of God has been destroyed. And then you have Rome also destroying the temple in 70 AD. And so those comparisons are natural because that's the way the Jewish people and the Christians saw that. Now we come to the laments of those who put their faith in Rome, in Babylon, Rome. Note that they do not grieve for their sins, or even really for Rome, for it being Rome, and oh gosh, they're really getting destroyed. The laments are because of the loss of economic security from the merchants, kings, and mariners, right? Notice that these laments are modeled on Ezekiel 27 concerning Tyre, right? And so if, for instance, if we look at Babylon as the imperial force that destroyed the temple, and so therefore we can compare Rome, well, whereas Rome in the first century was the powerhouse, not only in that sense, but also in a financial sense, then we have to find the Old Testament example that we can use that was also a financial powerhouse in the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, if you looked for a financial powerhouse, you would look at Tyre, right? Because Tyre was a huge shipping city, and it was north of Jerusalem. Notice that the list of goods traded by Babylon Rome is a first century updated version of those in Ezekiel 27. Again, the language comes pretty much directly from Ezekiel 27. And again, Ezekiel 27 is talking about Tyre. The list of 28 items is broken up into 6 categories. 1, precious stones and metals. 2, expensive fabrics. 3, costly woods and building materials. 4, spices and perfumes. 5, foods. 6, animals and human slaves. So note that it escalates until it ultimately gets to human slavery. So starting at 18:9. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and living in luxury with her will keep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Again, this is the destruction of Babylon/Rome. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, alas, alas, the great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Note that one of the major issues was that you had to buy and sell if you decided to take the mark of the beast, again, which is not a literal mark. The mark of the beast simply means that you participate in the empirical financial situation that has on their coinage that the emperor is God, right? And so even to use the money of the day, you had to agree that Domitian in their time was God. And that's not okay. It is not okay. So then at 1812, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots and slaves, that is, human souls, right? Note that all of this trade involves the taking of land from other countries and other atrocities by Rome, right? So if you barter in these things, then you're part of the problem. So for instance, note that the climax of cargo is the owning of slaves, further described as human souls who are the image bearers of God. For instance, Rome imported most of the metals in the list from Spain. And so they had mines in Spain, and they used slaves to work in the mines. And these slaves, please understand that in the ancient world, when we think of slavery, we think of African transatlantic slavery, right? And generally, in New Testament times, slavery would have been people who sold themselves into slavery, which is a very different thing. It's still bad, right? But it was people who sold themselves into slavery. But Rome got to the point to where there weren't enough people who were selling themselves into slavery, so they did basically the same thing as the transatlantic slavery. They would take people from groups that they had defeated. They would just take slaves from different areas, and they would use them. And so for slaves who worked in those mines in Spain, the average lifespan was 3 years. Right, so for you to get the gold and all of those things that you desired, you were basically killing all of these people who were working the mines. It's similar to the blood diamond trade in Africa and such from back in the day when they you were getting all these diamonds and stuff and they were being shipped all over the world, and then we find that all of these people are dying in order to get these diamonds. And it's like, is it worth it? That anybody, so you don't see those people, right? So is it really fair to just say, well, I don't see them, so therefore it doesn't really affect me? No. If anybody's dying because you're getting whatever it is you're getting, then do something different. That's not okay. That's the point here. It's not okay. So at 18:14, the fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in the linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in a single hour all of this wealth has been laid to waste, and all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all whose trade is on the sea stood far off, and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning, what city was like the great city? And notice that echoes earlier, and I don't remember which chapter it was, but remember it was who is like Babylon, right? And the point there was, I can't do anything because Babylon is so great and so scary that I can't do anything. Well, now note that we're looking at that in hindsight after the destruction of Babylon/Rome, where we're saying, what city was like the great city, right? And this is also going to be a reference to Ezekiel, where in Ezekiel 27:32, in their wailing, they raise a lamentation for you and lament, bless you, over you. Who is like Tyre, like one destroyed in the midst of the sea, right? And also notice that the destruction was of the smoke and the burning and such. And this would have also, and we've talked about Nero several times, and we've talked about the fire. There is, when that fire was burning in Rome, people stood off and they watched their livelihoods go up in smoke, literally. And I didn't put it in here to read it because it was pretty long, but there was an example from, who was it? One of the ancient historians who actually had, statements from people, and it talked about how they cried out and their houses and all of their businesses and things were being destroyed, and that some of them actually committed suicide because they had lost their livelihood, right? And so this is that same kind of thing where you have these people standing out here watching this place that they had put all their faith in, and then it was gone. It's kind of like the stock market, right? So when the stock market crashed and everybody had put all their money and everything and they put their faith in the stock market, and then the stock market crashed and they lost all of their money, and then what did people do? They were hopeless at that point. Well, you shouldn't be hopeless because you should have your faith in God, not in the stock market or whatever, again, part of the empire it is that you decide to put your faith in. You shouldn't be doing that. In their wailing, they raise a lamentation for you and lament over you. Who is like Tyre, like one destroyed in the midst of the sea? Rejoice over... Whoa, that's not right. What have I done? Oh, I had gone back. Hold on. Sorry. So we're starting at 19. And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in a single hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Right? So this is to the saints who had cried out, When, O Lord? And God said, just wait. Well, now they get their judgment, right? So this is a picture of the judgment that they had been asking for, those who had been killed. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will be found no more. And note that this language echoes Jeremiah 51, 63, and 64, which says, when you finish reading this book, tie a stone to it and cast it into the midst of the Euphrates, and say, thus shall Babylon sink, and this is literal Babylon, to rise no more, because of the disaster that I am bringing upon her, and they shall become exhausted. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. And look, everybody in the first century could look back and know that Babylon actually met its destruction. And so again, this would be a message of hope. Just like literal Babylon met its destruction, well, Babylon/Rome will also meet their destruction, as will every single persecuting empire that will ever rise up, because God is in control. That's the point. At 1822, and the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more, and a craftsman of any craft will be found in you no more, and the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. So all of those businesses that you put your faith in, not going to happen. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more, for your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. Note again, this whole idea of sorcery is again a reference back to Isaiah 47:9, which again reads, these two things shall come to you in a moment. In one day, the loss of children and widowhood shall come upon you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries and the great power of your enchantments. And in her was found the blood of the prophets of saints and of all who had been slain on earth. So note again, she had been judged for her atrocities against all people, because she, again, the slavery and all of the terrible things that happened, but especially against God's people, right? And so that's the point, is that that the blood of the saints were found in her because she had persecuted God's people, and so therefore God will get his judgment. And the saints will get their judgment, right? And so that's what's happening there. When we get to chapter 19 next, we will talk about the bride of Christ. And so now we've talked about how terrible this goes for the empire. Well, now we're going to see how well it's going to go for those who stayed faithful, and that instead of being Babylon/Rome and the total destruction, and they're going to have all of these demons and animals and stuff living there, we're going to see the bride of Christ and the city, the holy city, and then that will be a much more desirable picture. And so when you're reading the book and you look at those two pictures and you say, well, I don't think I want to live in Babylon, I think I want to live in the holy city. That's the point, is that you want to make the right decision, and all of these images and all of the scary stuff and all of the language is meant for you to make that decision. That's the point. Okay? Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.